The observation deck of the research station was crowded with crew members, all standing with crossed arms and hard expressions. Jiwon stood at the front of the room, his tablet shaking slightly in his hands. Behind him, a massive reinforced window showed the habitat bay below, where Ravik waited in the shadows. "I'm asking for 3 more months," Jiwon said, trying to keep his voice steady. "My research shows that Ravik has emotional intelligence. He responds to vocal patterns, he shows curiosity, and he has never attacked without being provoked first." Hyeri laughed from the back of the room. It was not a kind sound. Provoked? That thing nearly tore off Daehyun's arm last month. Because Daehyun hit it with a shock stick, Jiwon shot back, his patience wearing thin. "I have the security footage." Ravik was sleeping when Daehyun entered the habitat without permission. Taeho, the station commander, held up his hand for silence. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. "Jiwon, I've read your reports. I know you believe this creature is special, but the council has made their decision. Ravik is classified as a dangerous predator. We have 72 hours to either return it to the planet or terminate it." Ravik, 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 Ravik. The word terminate hit Jiwon like a physical blow. He looked around the room at the faces of people he had worked with for 2 years. Not one of them looked sympathetic. Most looked annoyed that he was wasting their time. "You can't," Jiwon said quietly. "You don't understand what he is." "What he is," Hyeri said, stepping forward, "is a monster. Look at it, Jiwon. 6 eyes, scales like knives, claws that could cut through steel. It's a killing machine." "He's intelligent," Jiwon insisted. "More intelligent than we give him credit for. If you would just let me continue the tests." "We've let you continue for 6 months, Taeho interrupted. 6 months of resources, of space, of risk. The council wants results, not feelings. I'm sorry, Jiwon. The decision is final." The meeting ended badly. Crew members filed out, some shaking their heads, others whispering to each other. Jiwon caught fragments of their conversations. "He's obsessed with that thing. Always was a bit strange. Probably going to get himself killed." Only Minho stayed behind, waiting until the room was empty. He was Jiwon's age, with kind eyes and oil stains on his engineering uniform. "I'm sorry," Minho said softly. "I know how much this matters to you." Jiwon didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded. "Are you going to fight this?" Minho asked. "I don't know how," Jiwon admitted. "The council has already decided. Taeho has to follow their orders." Minho put a hand on his shoulder. "Then maybe it's time to let him go. Return him to the planet. At least he'd be alive." Jiwon thought about the planet below. It was a harsh world, full of volcanic activity and poisonous atmosphere in most regions. Ravik's species lived in the deep caves, rarely seeing daylight. When Jiwon had found him 6 months ago, Ravik had been injured, trapped in a collapsed tunnel. Jiwon had spent 3 days digging him out, risking his own life in the process. "I can't," Jiwon said. "Not yet." After Minho left, Jiwon made his way down to the habitat bay. It was late in the station's night cycle, and the corridors were empty. He used his access code to enter the bay, and the heavy door slid shut behind him. The habitat was large, taking up an entire section of the lower deck. It had been designed for dangerous specimens, with reinforced walls and emergency containment systems. Most of the crew thought it looked like a prison. Jiwon had tried to make it comfortable, adding rocks and creating different temperature zones, but he knew it was nothing like Ravik's home. "Hey," Jiwon called softly into the darkness. "It's me." End quote. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a massive shape moved in the shadows. Ravik emerged slowly, his obsidian scales catching the dim light. He was enormous, easily 3 times Jiwon's size, with a body that seemed designed for both power and speed. His 6 eyes glowed faintly. each one tracking Jiwan's movements. Most people who saw Ravik felt immediate fear. Jiwan understood why. The creature looked like something from a nightmare, with blade-like appendages along his spine and claws that scraped against the metal floor. But Jiwan had learned to see past the frightening exterior. "Bad day," Jiwan said, sitting down on the floor near the habitat's inner wall. There was a force field between them, but Jiwan had configured it to allow sound through clearly. "They want to kill you. I'm trying to stop them, but I don't know if I can." Ravik moved closer to the force field. His massive head tilted to one side, and a low sound rumbled from his chest. It wasn't a growl or a threat. Jiwan had learned over the months that it was Ravik's way of showing concern. I know, Jiwan said, managing a weak smile. "I'm supposed to be the smart one, but I don't feel very smart right now." He pulled out a container from his bag. Inside were the protein blocks that Ravik preferred, mixed with minerals from the planet's soil. Jiwan had spent weeks figuring out the right combination. He opened a small access port in the force field and pushed the container through. Ravik took the food gently, his movements careful and deliberate. Jiwan had seen him move with incredible speed when startled, had seen those claws tear through solid rock. But around Jiwan, Ravik was always careful. "They call you a monster," Jiwan said, watching the creature eat. "They look at you, and all they see is something dangerous, something to be afraid of. But I see you, Ravik. I see how you wait for me every day. I see how you respond when I'm upset. I see how you've never once tried to hurt me, even when you could have." Ravik finished eating and moved even closer to the barrier. He lowered his massive head until one of his eyes was level with Jiwan. The eye was beautiful in its own way, like a pool of liquid silver with flecks of gold. Jiwan reached out and placed his hand against the force field. Ravik pressed his scaled snout against the barrier from the other side. They stayed like that for a long moment, separated by technology but connected by something neither of them fully understood. "I won't let them hurt you," Jiwan promised. "I don't know how yet, but I'll find a way." A sound echoed through the bay, the warning that someone else had requested access to the area. Jiwan stood quickly, wiping his eyes. He hadn't realized he'd been crying. "I have to go," he said to Ravik. "I'll be back in the morning. Try to rest." As Jiwan left the bay, he passed Hyeri in the corridor. She was in full security gear, a weapon at her hip. She looked at Jiwan with something between pity and disgust. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said. "Or maybe you're making it easier than it should be," Jiwan replied. He walked past her without waiting for a response. Behind him, through the walls of the habitat bay, he heard Ravik make that same low sound. It echoed through the empty corridor like a question that no one wanted to answer. In his quarters, Jiwan couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling and thought about all the ways he could fight this. He could refuse to cooperate. He could disable the habitat's termination systems. He could appeal directly to the council, though that would take weeks they didn't have. Or he could accept that sometimes, no matter how hard you fought, you lost anyway. But as he lay there in the darkness, listening to the hum of the station around him, Jiwan made a decision. He would fight, even if it cost him his career, his reputation, or his place on this station. He would fight because Ravik deserved someone to fight for him, because everyone deserved that. Even monsters. Especially monsters. Jiwan spent the next morning in the research lab, working frantically. He had less than 60 hours now, and every minute counted. His desk was covered with data tablets, brain scans, and behavioral analysis reports. If he could just prove that Ravik was truly intelligent, truly capable of complex thought and emotion, maybe the council would listen. Suman found him there at midday. She was the station's medical officer, a woman who believed in facts and science above all else. She looked at the mess on his desk and raised an eyebrow. "You look terrible," she said. "Thanks," Jiwan muttered, not looking up from the brain scan he was studying. "I heard about the council's decision." Sumin pulled up a chair and sat down. I'm sorry. Jiwon finally looked at her. Are you really? Or are you like everyone else who thinks I'm crazy for caring about him? Sumin was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned forward and looked at the scan. What am I looking at? Ravik's neural patterns, Jiwon explained. I took these over the past 3 months. Look at this region here. He pointed to a cluster of activity in the scan. This is associated with complex problem solving. And this area responds to emotional stimuli. It's similar to what we see in dolphins, elephants, even humans. Sumin studied the scan carefully. Her expression changed from polite interest to genuine surprise. This is remarkable. The neural density is higher than I expected. Because he's not just a mindless predator, Jiwon said. He thinks. He feels. He understands far more than we give him credit for. Have you shown this to Taeho? He won't look at it. He says the council's decision is based on safety protocols, not scientific merit. Jiwon's frustration was clear in his voice. They've already made up their minds. Sumin was quiet again, thinking. Then she said, I'll help you. Jiwon looked at her in surprise. What? I'll help you analyze the data. If we can present a strong enough case, maybe we can at least delay the execution. Buy you more time. She held up a hand before Jiwon could get too excited. I'm not doing this because I like that creature. I'm doing it because the science here is interesting. And because you're my friend. Even if you're being ridiculous about this, it wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement. But Jiwon would take it. Thank you. Then, they worked through the afternoon, analyzing neural patterns and behavioral data. Sumin was brilliant at her work, finding connections and patterns that Jiwon had missed. By evening, they had compiled a report that was genuinely impressive. This might work, Sumin said, reviewing their final document. The evidence for higher cognitive function is strong. If Taeho presents this to the council, he won't, Minho said from the doorway. He had been helping them by running some of the computational analysis. I just came from the command deck. The council sent a follow-up message. They're not interested in new data. The termination order stands. Jiwon felt something break inside him. He had been holding on to hope, thin as it was. Now, even that was gone. There has to be something we can do, he said. Minho looked uncomfortable. Jiwon. Maybe it's time to accept. No. Jiwon stood up abruptly. No. I'm not accepting this. I'm going to talk to Taeho myself. He left the lab before either of them could stop him. The station corridors were busy with the evening shift change, and Jiwon pushed past crew members without acknowledging them. He heard whispers as he passed. That's him, the one who loves the monster. Heard he sleeps down in the habitat bay sometimes. Probably lost his mind. Jiwon didn't care anymore what they thought. He reached the command deck and requested entry. Taeho was alone, studying star charts and maintenance reports. Jiwon, Taeho said wearily. I know why you're here. Then you know, I'm not going to stop fighting this. Taeho set down his tablet and rubbed his eyes. He looked older than usual, worn down by the weight of his responsibilities. I admire your dedication. I really do. But this is bigger than both of us. The council has made their decision based on station safety. I have to follow their orders. Even when those orders are wrong, even then. Taeho's voice was firm but not unkind. Jiwon, I've read your reports. All of them. I know you believe Ravik is special, but I have to think about the safety of everyone on this station. We have 70 people here. If that creature breaks containment, if someone gets killed, he won't. Jiwon interrupted. He's never tried to escape. He's never attacked anyone who didn't threaten him first. The incident with Daehyun was Daehyun's fault. Jiwon's voice rose despite himself. I showed you the footage. Daehyun entered the habitat without permission, drunk, and started hitting Ravik with a shock stick. What was Ravik supposed to do? Just take it? Tejo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I believe you. I do. But it doesn't change the reality of our situation. The Council sees a dangerous predator. They see a liability. And they have the authority to order its termination. Jiwan felt desperate now. What if I take responsibility? What if I sign whatever waivers you need, accept full liability for anything that happens? You know it doesn't work that way. Then what does work? Tell me what I need to do, and I'll do it. Tejo looked at him with something like sympathy. There's nothing you can do. I'm sorry. The termination is scheduled for tomorrow evening. I suggest you say your goodbyes. Crime. Jiwan left the command deck feeling hollow. He walked through the station without seeing anything, his mind racing through possibilities. He could sabotage the termination systems. He could disable the habitat's access codes. He could steal a shuttle and try to return Ravik to the planet, though they would probably shoot him down before he made it. He found himself at the habitat bay without remembering the walk. He entered using his access code, wondering how much longer it would work. Probably until after the termination. They would want him to be able to say goodbye. Ravik was waiting for him. As always. The creature seemed to sense Jiwan's mood, because he moved to the barrier immediately, making that low, concerned sound. They're going to kill you tomorrow, Jiwan said. His voice was flat, emotionless. He was too tired to cry anymore. I tried everything I could think of, and it wasn't enough. Ravik pressed against the barrier. His 6 eyes were all focused on Jiwan, watching him with an intensity that would have frightened most people. But Jiwan had learned to read those eyes. He saw concern there, curiosity, and something else that might have been understanding. I'm sorry, Jiwan whispered. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. A sound echoed through the bay. Someone else requesting access. Jiwan turned and saw Hayeri entering, her weapon drawn but not aimed. She looked at Jiwan, then at Ravik behind the barrier. I need you to step away from the habitat, Hayeri said. Why? The termination isn't until tomorrow. Tejo wants to move it up, tonight. He thinks it's more humane to do it while you're here to keep the creature calm. Jiwan felt cold. No. It's not a request, Jiwan. I said no. Jiwan moved to stand directly in front of the barrier's control panel. You'll have to go through me. You will have to go through me. Hayeri's expression hardened. Don't make this difficult. Difficult? Jiwan laughed, and it was not a sane sound. You're going to murder an intelligent being because you're afraid of him. Because he looks different. Because he doesn't fit into your neat categories of what deserves to live. And you're telling me not to make it difficult? That thing is dangerous. His name is Ravik, Jiwan shouted. He has a name. He's not a thing. He's not an it. He's a living being who thinks and feels and deserves a chance to exist. Behind him, Ravik moved. The creature surged forward, not attacking but positioning itself between Jiwan and Hayeri. The movement was so fast that Hayeri raised her weapon instinctively. See? Hayeri said. He's protecting me, Jiwan said quietly. He saw you with a weapon pointed at me, and he's trying to protect me. For a moment, something flickered in Hayeri's expression. Doubt. Maybe. Or recognition. But it was gone quickly, replaced by cold professionalism. I'm calling this in, she said, backing toward the door. Don't do anything stupid, Jiwan. After she left, Jiwan turned back to Ravik. The creature was still pressed against the barrier, watching the door where Hayeri had been. Thank you, Jiwan said softly. For trying to protect me. Ravik looked at him, and Jiwan would have sworn the creature understood every word. That night, Jiwan made a decision. He couldn't save Ravik through official channels, but maybe he could save him another way. He began to plan, knowing it would probably cost him everything. But some things were worth the cost. The alarm woke everyone on the station at 3 a.m. It was a sound that no one wanted to hear, a piercing wail that meant immediate danger. Ji-won jerked awake in his quarters, his heart pounding. He had fallen asleep at his desk while working on his desperate plan to save Ravik. The intercom crackled to life. Taeho's voice, tense and controlled. All crew to emergency stations. Unknown vessel approaching. This is not a drill. Ji-won rushed out of his quarters and into the corridor. Other crew members were emerging, some still in sleep clothes, all looking confused and frightened. The station shuddered slightly, and the lights flickered. "What's happening?" someone shouted. No one had an answer. Ji-won made his way to the nearest observation window and looked out into space. In the distance, he could see a ship. It was larger than their research station, dark and angular, with weapons visible along its hull. Minho appeared beside him, breathing hard. "That's a Krath raider." Ji-won felt his blood turn cold. Everyone in this sector of space knew about the Krath. They were pirates, scavengers, and killers. They attacked research stations and small colonies, taking whatever they wanted and leaving no survivors. "Why would they come here?" Ji-won asked. "We don't have anything valuable. We have supplies, equipment, and 70 people who can be sold as slaves," Minho said grimly. "That's valuable enough." The station shuddered again, harder this time. The lights went out completely, replaced by emergency red lighting. Another voice came over the intercom. This time, "Hyeri, the Krath vessel has opened fire. Main power core is damaged. All crew proceed to evacuation pods. This is an evacuation order. Repeat. This is an evacuation order." Panic erupted in the corridor. People started running toward the evacuation pod bays, pushing and shoving. Ji-won was swept along with the crowd, but his mind was racing. The habitat bay was on the lower deck. If the station was being evacuated, what would happen to Ravik? He pushed against the crowd, trying to go the opposite direction. Minho grabbed his arm. "What are you doing? We need to get to the pods." "Ravik is still down there," Ji-won said. "Ji-won? We don't have time." An explosion rocked the station. The floor beneath them buckled, and several people fell. Emergency bulkheads began to close, sealing off damaged sections. Ji-won tore free from Minho's grip and ran toward the lower deck access ladder. "Ji-won," Minho shouted after him, but Ji-won was already gone. The lower deck was chaos. Smoke filled the corridors, and sparks flew from damaged electrical systems. Ji-won pulled his shirt over his mouth and nose, trying not to breathe the toxic air. He could hear more explosions above him, and the terrible sound of hull breaches, air screaming out into vacuum. He reached the habitat bay and punched in his access code. Nothing happened. The power was out. He tried the manual override, but the door was sealed. Behind it, he could hear Ravik making sounds he had never heard before. Not the gentle rumbling or the concerned tones. This was something else. Fear. "I'm here!" Ji-won shouted through the door. "I'm going to get you out." He looked around desperately for something to pry the door open. There was a maintenance locker nearby, and he smashed the lock with a piece of broken equipment. Inside, he found a plasma cutter. His hands were shaking as he activated it and began cutting through the door's locking mechanism. It took precious minutes. Minutes he knew they didn't have. But finally, the door groaned and slid partially open. Ji-won squeezed through the gap into the habitat bay. The room was a disaster. The reinforced window that looked out into space had a crack running through it. The habitat's containment systems were sparking and failing, and Ravik was pressed against the far wall, his 6 eyes wide with fear. "It's okay," Ji-won said, trying to keep his voice calm even though his heart was hammering. He ran to the containment controls and began shutting down the force field. Alarms blared, warning him that he was releasing a dangerous specimen. He ignored them. The force field flickered and died. For a moment, Ravik didn't move. The creature stared at Ji-won, at the open space between them, as if he couldn't believe he was free. Then another explosion shook the station, and part of the ceiling collapsed. Ji-won dove out of the way, but he wasn't fast enough. A piece of metal beam came down and pinned his leg. Pain exploded through him, and he screamed. Ravik moved. The creature was across the room in an instant, his massive claws gripping the beam. With a strength that seemed impossible, Ravik lifted the heavy metal and threw it aside. Then he was next to Ji-won, making that low, concerned sound. His head lowered to look at Ji-won's injured leg. "I'm okay," Ji-won gasped, though he clearly wasn't. His leg was bleeding badly, and he could barely stand. "We need to get out of here." He tried to stand and immediately collapsed. Ravik caught him, gently but firmly. The creature's scales were warm, and Ji-won could feel the power in the muscles beneath them. Ravik lifted Ji-won carefully, holding him like he weighed nothing. "The evacuation pods," Ji-won said, pointing. "We need to go up." But as they reached the corridor, they heard new sounds. Weapons fire. Screaming. The Krath weren't just attacking the station. They had boarded it. Ji-won and Ravik moved through the smoke-filled corridors. Ravik was careful with Ji-won, but the creature's whole body was tense, alert. They were halfway to the evacuation deck when they heard voices ahead. "Check every room. If you find anyone, take them alive if possible. Dead, if necessary." The voices were speaking in the harsh language of the Krath. Ji-won felt Ravik tense even more. The creature gently set Ji-won down in a doorway, hidden in shadows. "Wait here," Ji-won whispered, though he had no idea if Ravik understood. But Ravik was already moving forward, into the corridor where the Krath were approaching. Ji-won tried to call him back and couldn't make his voice work. He could only watch as Ravik disappeared around the corner. There were sounds. Shouting in the Krath language. Weapons, fire, and then screaming. It lasted only seconds. Then, silence. Ravik came back, his scales covered in dark blood that wasn't his own. He picked up Ji-won again and continued forward. They passed the bodies of 3 Krath raiders. Ji-won tried not to look at them, but he couldn't help noticing how efficiently they had been killed. Quick, precise, deadly. "You're protecting me," Ji-won said quietly. "Even after everything they wanted to do to you. You're protecting me." Ravik made a soft sound and kept moving. They reached the evacuation deck to find it in chaos. Crew members were fighting desperately against Krath boarders. Hyeri was there, her arm bleeding, trying to hold a defensive position with 5 other crew members. They were outnumbered and losing. A Krath warrior had Sumin cornered, his weapon raised. She was on the ground, her medical supplies scattered around her. The warrior was laughing. Ravik set Ji-won down carefully against a wall. Then the creature charged. The Krath warrior didn't have time to react. Ravik hit him like a force of nature, all speed and power and rage. The warrior went down, and Ravik was already moving to the next threat. The other Krath turned their weapons on Ravik. Energy blasts hit the creature's scales, scoring them but not penetrating. Ravik roared, and it was a sound that made everyone freeze. It was the sound of something ancient and powerful, and absolutely terrifying. Then Ravik attacked in earnest. Ji-won watched from his position against the wall, his vision starting to blur from blood loss. He saw Ravik moving through the Krath raiders like a storm, like something unstoppable. The creature that everyone had called a monster was now the only thing standing between the crew and certain death. Hyeri was staring at Ravik with wide eyes. So was Sumin. So were all the crew members, who could see what was happening. The monster they had feared, the creature they had wanted dead, was saving their lives. More Krath were coming. Ji-won could hear them in the corridors. Too many. Even Ravik couldn't fight them all. But he was going to try. The creature positioned himself between the crew and the approaching raiders, his 6 eyes glowing with determination. He looked back once at Ji-won, and Ji-won understood. Ravik was making a choice. He could escape, could run, could save himself. Instead, he was choosing to stay, to fight, To protect the people who had hated him, Ji-won tried to stand, to help somehow, but his leg wouldn't support him. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Ravik charging forward into a wave of Kroth raiders, fighting for people who had never fought for him. Fighting because that was what you did for those you loved. Even if they had never loved you back. Pain brought Ji-won back to consciousness. His leg was on fire, and his head pounded. But he was alive. Which meant Ravik had succeeded in protecting him. He forced his eyes open and immediately wished he hadn't. The evacuation deck was a war zone. Bodies lay scattered across the floor, mostly Krath but some crew members too. The walls were scorched from weapons fire, and blood, both red and alien colors, covered nearly every surface. And in the middle of it all stood Ravik. The creature was surrounded by 6 Krath warriors, all heavily armed. Ravik's scales were damaged, bleeding from multiple wounds. One of his blade-like appendages hung at an odd angle, clearly broken. But his 6 eyes were still bright with determination, and he stood between the Kroth and the huddled group of surviving crew members. Hyeri was there, her weapon empty and useless. Suman was trying to treat wounded crew members while keeping one eye on the fighting. Minho had somehow made it to the evacuation deck and was clutching a piece of broken equipment like a weapon. They all looked terrified, but Ravik stood firm. "Fall back!" One of the Krath shouted in his harsh language. Ji-won had studied enough alien languages to understand the basics. "This creature is too dangerous. We need heavy weapons." "The commander wants prisoners," another Krath argued. "If we retreat now, there won't be anyone left to take prisoner," the first one interrupted. "Look at it. It's killed 15 of our warriors already." Ravik roared again. That same terrifying sound from before. The Krath actually stepped backward. These were hardened pirates who made their living through violence and intimidation. But they were afraid. They were afraid of the monster. Ji-won tried to call out to Ravik, to tell him to run, to save himself. But his voice came out as barely a whisper. His body wasn't working properly. He had lost too much blood. The Krath warriors made a decision. They opened fire all at once. A coordinated attack meant to overwhelm Ravik's defenses. Energy blasts hit the creature from multiple angles. Ravik staggered but didn't fall. Instead, he charged. What happened next was almost too fast to follow. Ravik moved with a speed that seemed impossible for something so large. He closed the distance to the nearest Krath in seconds, his claws flashing. The warrior went down. Then another. Then another. But there were too many. Even as Ravik fought, more Kroth were entering the evacuation deck. They were trying to surround him, to cut him off from the crew members he was protecting. "We need to help him," Minho said, his voice shaking. "With what?" Hyeri asked bitterly. Her weapon was empty, and she was injured. "We're helpless." "He's not helpless," Suman said quietly. She was staring at Ravik with an expression of wonder and horror. "Look at him. He's magnificent." Ravik was magnificent, terrifying and deadly and beautiful in his own alien way. He fought with a precision that spoke of intelligence, targeting weapons first, then vulnerable joints. He wasn't just attacking randomly. He was thinking, strategizing, adapting to each new threat. A Krath warrior managed to get a clear shot and hit Ravik directly in the side. The creature stumbled, and dark blood flowed from the wound. But Ravik didn't stop. He couldn't stop. If he fell, everyone behind him would die. Ji-won watched through blurry eyes as Ravik took hit after hit, wound after wound, and kept fighting. The creature's movements were getting slower, less precise. He was losing, but he wasn't giving up. "Ravik," Ji-won whispered. "Please. Run. Save yourself." As if hearing him across the chaos of battle, Ravik glanced back. Their eyes met for just a moment. And in that moment, Ji-won saw the answer. Ravik wasn't going to run. This was his choice. His decision. He was going to stand and fight for these people. even if it killed him. Because that was what love meant. Sacrifice. Protection. Standing between danger and those who mattered to you, no matter the cost. The crew members seemed to realize this too. Hairi was crying, something Jiwon had never seen before. Minho was pale and shaking. Suman had stopped treating the wounded and was just staring at Ravik with an expression of guilt and shame. "We called him a monster," Hairi said softly. "We wanted him dead, and he's saving us anyway," Minho finished. A new sound echoed through the station. Heavy footsteps, heavier than the normal Krath warriors. The crew members looked at each other in fear. They all knew what that sound meant. The Krath commander was coming. The warriors on the evacuation deck fell back immediately, creating a path. Through the smoke and chaos walked a massive Krath, easily twice the size of his warriors. He was covered in battle armor and carried a weapon that looked like it could punch through a ship's hull. He looked at Ravik and laughed. It was a deep, cruel sound. "This is what has been killing my warriors," he said in heavily accented common language. "A wounded animal?" Pathetic. Ravik faced him, swaying slightly from blood loss but still standing. The creature's 6 eyes were locked on the Krath commander, assessing the new threat. "I will enjoy breaking you," the commander said. He raised his massive weapon. What happened next was almost too fast to see. The commander fired, but Ravik was already moving, using the last of his strength to dodge. The energy blast hit the wall behind him, blowing a hole in the station's hull. Emergency bulkheads started to close, sealing off the breach. Ravik lunged at the commander, claws extended. The two titans collided with a sound like thunder. They were matched in size, but the commander had armor and weapons. Ravik had only his natural weapons and his desperate determination to protect. They fought across the evacuation deck, a battle of raw power and killing intent. The commander was strong, experienced, and ruthless. But Ravik had something the commander didn't. He had a reason to win that went beyond survival. The crew members watched in frozen horror as the battle raged. Ravik was losing. Everyone could see it. He was too wounded, too tired, too outnumbered. But still, he fought. The commander managed to get Ravik in a grip, his armored arms crushing the creature's body. Ravik's scales cracked under the pressure. He roared in pain, but didn't stop fighting. "Die, animal," the commander growled. But Ravik had one weapon the commander had forgotten about. The blade-like appendages along his spine, the ones everyone thought were just for show. Ravik twisted his body in a way that shouldn't have been possible, and drove those blades directly into the gaps in the commander's armor. The commander's eyes went wide. He released Ravik and staggered backward, dark blood pouring from multiple wounds. He looked down at himself in disbelief, then up at Ravik with something that might have been respect. "You fight well," the commander said in his own language. Then he fell. The remaining Krath warriors stared at their fallen leader in shock. Then they looked at Ravik, at the creature that had just killed the strongest warrior in their clan. Without a word, they turned and ran. Ravik stood there, swaying dangerously. He turned to look at the crew members, making sure they were safe. Then, his legs gave out, and he collapsed. "Ravik!" Jiwon screamed, finding his voice at last. He tried to crawl toward the creature, but his injured leg wouldn't cooperate. Minho got there first, then Hairi, then Suman. They surrounded Ravik, these people who had hated and feared him. Suman was already pulling out medical supplies, her hands moving quickly to try to stop the bleeding. "Is he alive?" Hairi asked, her voice thick with emotion. Suman pressed her hand against Ravik's massive chest. "Barely. He's losing too much blood. I don't know if I can save him." "Try," Jiwon begged. "Please try." The crew members worked together, following Suman's instructions. They used emergency medical supplies meant for humans, improvising as best they could. More crew members came from the evacuation pods, drawn by the sounds of battle. They stopped and stared at the scene before them. Ravik, the monster they had condemned, lying broken and bleeding. And the crew, desperately trying to save his life. "The Krath are retreating," someone reported. "Their ship is pulling back. We won," another person said in disbelief. "No," Hyeri said, looking down at Ravik. "He won. He saved us all." Jiwon finally managed to crawl close enough to touch Ravik. He placed his hand on the creature's scaled head, feeling the faint warmth still there. "Stay with us," Jiwon whispered. "Please stay with us. We were wrong. We were so wrong about you." One of Ravik's 6 eyes opened slightly, looking at Jiwon. The creature made a soft sound. That same gentle rumble Jiwon had heard so many times in the Habitat Bay. It was the sound of recognition, of trust, of love. Then the eye closed, and Ravik was still. The next hours were a blur of emergency procedures and desperate medical work. Suman had set up a makeshift medical bay in one of the few undamaged sections of the station. Ravik lay on the floor, too large for any medical bed, covered in bandages and medical equipment that was never designed for his alien physiology. Jiwon sat beside him, refusing to leave despite his own injuries. His leg had been treated and splinted, but he barely felt the pain. All his attention was focused on Ravik, on the shallow rise and fall of the creature's chest, on the faint pulse that Suman monitored constantly. "He's stable," Suman said for the 3rd time. "But Jiwon, I don't know if he'll wake up. The trauma was extensive. His body is trying to repair itself. But he'll wake up," Jiwon said firmly. "He has to." Suman didn't argue. She just squeezed his shoulder gently and went back to monitoring the medical equipment. Other crew members came by throughout the night. They stood in the doorway, looking at Ravik with expressions that ranged from guilt to wonder to shame. Hyeri came, her arm properly bandaged now. She stood there for a long time, just staring at the creature she had wanted dead. "I was wrong," she said finally. "I was so wrong about him." Jiwon looked up at her, too tired for anger. "We all make mistakes. Not mistakes like this." Hyeri's voice was rough with emotion. "I called him a monster. I pushed for his execution. And he saved my life anyway. He saved all our lives. That's who he is," Jiwon said softly. "That's who he's always been. I tried to tell everyone, but no one would listen." Hyeri knelt down beside Jiwon, her eyes on Ravik. "I'm listening now. Tell me about him." So Jiwon did. He told her about finding Ravik trapped in the collapsed tunnel, injured and afraid. He told her about the weeks of patient work to earn the creature's trust. He told her about discovering Ravik's intelligence, his capacity for emotion, his gentle nature despite his terrifying appearance. "He used to hum," Jiwon said, a sad smile on his face. "When he was content, it was this low sound, almost like music. The first time I heard it, I thought the station's engines were malfunctioning, but it was just Ravik, happy to have company." Other crew members joined them as Jiwon talked. Minho sat down, then Suman, then others. They listened to stories about the creature they had condemned, about the being they had refused to see. "I would read to him sometimes," Jiwon continued. "Research papers, mostly. I don't think he understood the words, but he liked the sound of my voice. He would move closer to the barrier and just listen." "Did he have a family?" someone asked. "On the planet?" Jiwon nodded. "I think so. His species lives in groups, from what I observed. When I first found him, he kept making these calls, like he was trying to contact someone. But no one answered. The crew was quiet, absorbing this. They had thought of Ravik as a specimen, a dangerous animal. They had never considered that he might be lonely, that he might miss his home and his family. "We're terrible people," Minho said quietly. "No," Jiwon said. "You're just people. Fear makes us do terrible things sometimes, but so does love." Ravik was afraid too. In the beginning, afraid of me, of humans, of this strange place he found himself in. But he chose trust over fear. He chose love over hate. That's what makes him special. Tejo appeared in the doorway, looking haggard. The station commander had been coordinating the emergency repairs and accounting for casualties. 12 crew members had died in the attack. Without Ravik, it would have been 70. I need to send a report to the council, Tejo said. I want to make sure I get the facts right. Jiwan looked at him warily. What kind of report? The truth. Tejo came into the room and looked down at Ravik. That we were attacked by Krath raiders, that we would have all died, and that we were saved by a creature we had condemned to death, a creature who chose to protect us, despite having every reason to let us die. He pulled out his tablet and began typing. I'm also recommending that Ravik be granted full sentient being status, with all associated rights and protections. I'm recommending that Dr. 2C Jiwan be commended for his research and his dedication. Hayeri stood up. I want to add my statement to that report. I want the council to know that I was wrong, that I let my fear cloud my judgment, and that Ravik deserves better than what we gave him. Me too, Minho said. And me, Suman added. One by one, every crew member in the room volunteered to add their testimony. They wanted the council to know what had happened here, what Ravik had done, who he truly was. Jiwan felt tears running down his face. But for the first time in days, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief and hope and gratitude. Thank you, he whispered. The night stretched on. The station slowly came back online, section by section. Emergency power was restored. Then communications. A distress signal had been sent, and a response came. A military vessel was being dispatched to provide assistance and additional security. They would arrive in 3 days. Jiwan stayed with Ravik through it all. He dozed sometimes, his head resting against the creature's warm side, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Other times he talked, telling Ravik about what was happening, about how the crew had changed. They see you now, Jiwan said softly. Really see you. Not the monster they wanted you to be, but the person you are. I wish you could know that. I wish you could hear me. As dawn approached, station time, something changed. Ravik's breathing became deeper, stronger. One of his eyes opened. Then another. Then all 6. They focused on Jiwan with that same intelligence and warmth that Jiwan had seen so many times before. Ravik, Jiwan breathed. You're awake. The creature made a soft sound. That gentle rumble of recognition. He tried to move, and winced. The pain of his injuries, still acute. Don't move, Jiwan said quickly. You're hurt. You need to rest. Suman appeared immediately, checking vital signs and adjusting medication. He's awake. That's a good sign. A very good sign. Other crew members came running at the news. Soon, the medical bay was crowded with people, all wanting to see for themselves that Ravik had survived. Hayeri stepped forward slowly, carefully. She approached Ravik, with her hands visible and empty, showing she meant no threat. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry for how I treated you. You saved my life. You saved all our lives, and I wanted you dead. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. Ravik watched her with those 6 luminous eyes. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached out one massive claw and gently touched her shoulder. It was the lightest of touches. Barely a pressure at all, but the meaning was clear. Forgiveness. Hayeri broke down completely, tears streaming down her face. Other crew members were crying too, overcome by the moment. This creature, they had feared and hated, was showing them grace they hadn't earned. We're going to do better, Tejo said, stepping forward. All of us. We're going to make sure that what happened here never happens again, that no one judges a being by their appearance alone. That fear doesn't rule our decisions. Ravik looked at each person in turn, as if memorizing their faces. Then his eyes came to rest on Jiwan, and that low humming sound began. The sound of contentment. The sound of home. Jiwan pressed his forehead against Ravik's massive head. Both of them, damaged but alive. Both of them, surrounded by people who finally understood. You taught us something, Jiwan said, knowing everyone was listening. You taught us that monsters aren't born. They're created by fear, by prejudice, by refusing to see beyond the surface. The real monsters were us, not you. You were always the hero of this story. We just couldn't see it. Minho spoke up from the back of the room. I've been working on the habitat, making it better, bigger. When Ravik is recovered, he'll have a proper home here. If he wants to stay. Or we could return him to his planet, Tejo offered. Find his family, if they still live. Whatever Ravik wants, we'll make it happen. Jiwan looked at Ravik, the question in his eyes. Stay or go? Safety or home? Ravik looked back at him and made that gentle sound again. Then, the creature carefully, despite his injuries, wrapped one massive arm around Jiwan. It was a gesture of protection, of affection, of belonging. The answer was clear. Home wasn't a place. Home was the people who saw you for who you truly were. Home was where you were loved and accepted and valued. Ravik had found his home. Not in the caves of his birth planet, but here, among the humans, who had finally learned to see past their fear. Days passed. The military vessel arrived and helped with repairs. The Council's response to Tejo's report came back. Ravik was granted full sentient status. Jiwan was not only commended but offered a position heading a new xenobiological ethics research division. His first mission would be to establish protocols to prevent what had happened with Ravik from ever happening again. The crew held a memorial service for those who had died in the attack. Ravik attended, standing quietly at the back, a massive presence that no longer frightened anyone. When Hayari spoke about courage and sacrifice, she looked directly at Ravik. Everyone understood who the true hero of that day had been. Weeks later, when Ravik had mostly recovered, Jiwan took him to the observation deck. They stood together, looking out at the stars, at the vast universe full of wonders and terrors and infinite possibilities. Thank you, Jiwan said quietly, for choosing to protect us, for showing us that love is stronger than fear, for teaching us to be better than we were. Ravik hummed softly, that sound of contentment and peace. His 6 eyes reflected the starlight, and in them Jiwan saw something profound. Not a monster, not a specimen, not a thing to be studied or feared, a friend, a guardian, a being of courage and compassion who had shown humanity its own reflection and challenged them to become worthy of his sacrifice. In the observation deck, surrounded by the infinite darkness of space, 2 beings stood together, different in every way that could be measured, and yet the same in the only way that truly mattered. They had both chosen love over fear, trust over suspicion, hope over despair, and in that choice, they had both become more than they were. They had become proof that the universe was bigger and more beautiful than anyone's prejudices could contain. They had become heroes, both of them,